My husband and his brothers pulled a prank and left me 300 miles from home. I never returned. 5 years later, he tracked me down and his smile faded when he saw who was with me. I still remember the sound of their laughter as the Ford pickup pulled away. The tires kicked up dust, the Arizona sun was scorching on my back, and my heart dropped straight into my stomach. "Blake!" I yelled, running after them, my hands waving like a fool. "Blake!" But they just laughed harder. His brothers, Connor and Jackson, had their heads sticking out the windows, filming the whole thing like it was some kind of joke. I could hear Jackson shouting, "Good luck, Aurora. See you in 300 miles, as they drove off into the desert heat. That Texaco station sat in the middle of nowhere. One pump, a filthy restroom, and a vending machine with stale Doritos. Nothing else for miles. My iPhone had just died, no charger, no wallet. I'd left everything in the truck when I ran inside to grab Blake a Monster energy drink. He had asked for it so sweetly, told me he was too exhausted to walk inside after driving all night. So I'd gone in, like the dutiful wife I was. And when I came out 30 seconds later, they were gone. I waited. First 5 minutes, then 20, then an hour. I kept staring down that empty highway, expecting to see the pickup come back around the bend. I thought it was just another stupid joke. Blake had done plenty of immature things before, but never like this. Never something so heartlessly cruel. I sat on that burning concrete curb. My hands were shaking, my mouth dry as the desert around me. Every few minutes I stood and paced, pretending I wasn't terrified, pretending this wasn't really happening to me. Then my phone buzzed just before the battery finally died completely. A single text message from Blake, "Don't be mad, babe. Just a prank. We'll come back in a bit." I stared at those words on my cracked screen. I didn't laugh. I didn't even cry. I felt hollow inside, like someone had scooped out my insides with a spoon. This wasn't funny. This wasn't some harmless joke between friends. This was the man I married, the man I cooked dinner for every night, defended to my family, supported through everything, and he thought leaving me stranded hundreds of miles from our home in Phoenix was entertainment for his brothers. That was the moment it clicked for me. Not suddenly, but in a slow, creeping way. Like when you realize you've been sick for a long time and just got used to feeling awful. I looked around that desolate truck stop, one 18-wheeler filling up, dusty highway stretching endlessly in both directions, no sheriff station, no motel, just a convenience store clerk who shrugged and said, "They'll be back, I reckon." But deep down, I knew they wouldn't be. Not anytime soon. And for the first time in 5 years of marriage, I didn't want them to be. I'd spent those 5 years trying to keep Blake's family happy. Every Sunday dinner at his parents' house in Scottsdale, every birthday party for Connor's twin boys, every sarcastic comment I let slide because that's just how the Mitchell men are, Aurora. This time, I wasn't going to wait around for their amusement to end. A woman pulled up in a Honda Odyssey, 2 kids arguing in the back seat. I approached her nervously, sweaty, scared, clutching nothing but a half-warm bottle of Dasani. I asked if she was headed north toward Flagstaff. She looked me up and down, clearly concerned, then nodded. "I can take you as far as I'm going," she said kindly. "You okay, honey?" I told her I would be, though I wasn't sure I believed it yet. We drove for hours through the painted desert. I didn't talk much, just stared out the window at the red rocks and endless sky, thinking about everything that had led me to this moment. I didn't cry, not once. I think I had already cried too many tears over the years, trying to make that marriage work. Her name was Patricia, and she dropped me at a Greyhound station in a small mountain town called Cedar Ridge that I'd never heard of. I thanked her profusely. She gave me $20 just in case and her phone number, telling me to call if I ever needed anything. I'll never forget that stranger's kindness when my own husband had shown me none. I used the last bit of battery on my phone to check bus schedules and send a desperate message to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, my Aunt Rosemary in coastal Oregon. All I wrote was, "Can I come stay with you for a while? I don't know where else to go." A few minutes later, a reply appeared, "Always, sweetheart. Come home." That night, I bought a one-way Greyhound ticket to Portland with Patricia's $20 and some crumpled bills I found in my jacket pocket. As the bus rumbled north through the mountains, I watched Arizona fade behind us and realized something profound. I wasn't going back. Not to Blake, not to their cruel laughter, not to a life where my pain was their entertainment. And for the first time in a very long time, I could actually breathe. Looking back now, I think I always knew something wasn't right in my marriage. Even when things seemed good, there was this constant ache in my chest I could never shake. I used to tell myself that all marriages had problems, that Blake loved me in his own way. But the truth was, Blake didn't really love me, not the way I deserved. He loved how I made him feel about himself. He loved having someone to show off when things were going well and someone to blame when they weren't. And his brothers made everything 10 times worse. Connor and Jackson were older, louder, and always brewing up some ridiculous scheme. Blake worshipped them like they were gods walking on earth. Every weekend it was something new: water balloons in our shower, fake eviction notices taped to our door, even hiding my car keys before a crucial job interview just to see what I'd do. That stunt nearly cost me a position at Wells Fargo. But Blake just laughed it off, said I needed to lighten up and have some fun. They called it pranking. I called it systematic cruelty. I didn't speak up much back then. I thought maybe I was the problem, maybe I was too sensitive. I tried to laugh along, tried to be the cool wife who rolled her eyes and said, "Boys will be boys." But it hurt every single time. After 3 years of marriage, I started secretly setting money aside. Not because I was actively planning to leave, not yet, but because something deep inside whispered, one day you might have to run. I'd squirrel away $10 here, 20 there. I opened a small savings account under my mother's maiden name and never told anyone about it. Blake never noticed because he wasn't interested in our finances. That was Aurora's thing. When I stepped off that Greyhound bus in Portland the next morning, the air smelled like pine trees and ocean salt, so different from the desert heat I'd left behind. Aunt Rosemary was waiting in her old blue Subaru. She looked older than I remembered, silver hair in a neat bun, but her hug felt exactly the same as when I was 10 years old. She didn't ask what happened, didn't pry for details. She just said, "Let's get you inside, sweetheart," and drove me to her cottage in Cannon Beach. For the first time in years, I felt like someone was genuinely on my side. Like I didn't have to prove myself or explain why I was tired or hurt or scared. I just had to exist, and that was enough. I took the longest shower of my life that first night, scrubbing off the dust, the tears, and the years of pretending to be someone I wasn't. Standing there wrapped in Aunt Rosemary's soft towel, looking at my reflection in her bathroom mirror, I made myself a promise: "You're not going back, Aurora. Not ever again." Aunt Rosemary's cottage sat on a quiet street lined with weathered cedar shakes and gardens that belonged in a Hallmark movie. Her house smelled like lavender and fresh sourdough bread. Every corner felt warm, lived in, safe. I slept for 2 days straight after I arrived, not just from exhaustion, but from years of constant tension, faked smiles, and the never-ending effort to keep peace in a household that thrived on chaos. When I finally woke up, Aunt Rosemary was sitting at her kitchen table working on a crossword puzzle. She slid a plate of scrambled eggs and wheat toast in front of me, then handed me an envelope. Inside was $300 cash and a folded piece of paper with a name written on it, Aurora Sterling. "My friend at the Ocean View Diner needs help," she said gently. "They don't ask many questions there. Just tell them that's your name if anyone comes looking." I stared at that paper. Sterling was my mother's maiden name. I hadn't used it since I was 18. But seeing it written there, it felt like putting on a coat that had been hanging in my closet for years. Familiar, comfortable, mine. I started working at the Ocean View Diner that same week. It was a small place right on the beach with sticky menus and faded vinyl booths, but the customers were kind and the owner, Mrs. Thompson, paid me cash at the end of each shift. I worked mornings mostly, pouring coffee, taking orders for blueberry pancakes and fish and chips, wiping down tables. It wasn't glamorous work, but it gave me purpose and, more importantly, it gave me time to think clearly for the first time in years. At night, I'd sit on Aunt Rosemary's back deck, sipping chamomile tea and watching the Pacific waves crash against the rocks. She never pushed me to talk about what happened, just sat beside me quietly, working on her quilting or humming old Beatles songs. Sometimes I thought about Blake, not with longing, but with genuine confusion. How had I let myself stay so long in something that was slowly killing my spirit? I hadn't just lost myself in that marriage, I had willingly handed myself over, piece by piece. But here in Oregon, I was getting those pieces back. A few weeks into my new life, everything changed again. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon in late September, the diner nearly empty except for a couple of local fishermen arguing about the weather. I was refilling the napkin dispensers when I heard the bell above the door jingle urgently. A man stumbled inside, tall, broad-shouldered, rough around the edges, and covered in blood. At first, my body tensed completely, thinking this might be another cruel joke. But then I saw his eyes, wild with pain, desperately real. "Help," he gasped before collapsing near the counter. Time seemed to freeze. Then my instincts kicked in hard. I rushed over, checked his pulse, grabbed a clean dish rag, and pressed it firmly against the bleeding wound in his side. Mrs. Thompson called 911 while I stayed with him, whispering, "You're going to be okay. Just hold on. Help is coming." The paramedics arrived within minutes. They worked on him right there on the diner's linoleum floor, cutting away his shirt, starting in 4, asking rapid-fire questions I couldn't answer. Before they wheeled him out on a stretcher, he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength and looked straight into my eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse but sincere. His name was Cole, I learned later. That's all I knew about him then. I didn't think I'd ever see him again, but 3 days later he came limping back through that door, bruised, bandaged, but standing on his own 2 feet. He asked for black coffee and a slice of Mrs. Thompson's famous apple pie. Then he asked for my name. "Aurora," I said carefully, studying his face. He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen in longer than I could remember. "Thank you for saving my life, Aurora." He started coming in every few days after that, always claiming the same corner booth by the big window overlooking the ocean. Sometimes he'd read the local newspaper or a worn paperback novel. Sometimes he'd just sit quietly and stare out at the waves. He didn't talk much at first, but when he did speak, he was completely different from any man I'd known before. He didn't interrupt me mid-sentence. He didn't make jokes at my expense or try to be the center of attention. He actually listened when I spoke. It felt strange and new and wonderful. I didn't know who he really was or what had happened to bring him bleeding into my life, but one thing became crystal clear: he was running from something dangerous too. Maybe that's why I didn't feel quite so alone anymore. By the time autumn settled over Cannon Beach, Cole had become a regular part of my carefully rebuilt world. He never said much about his past, and I never pressed him for details. It felt like we had an unspoken agreement. I wouldn't ask where he came from, and he wouldn't ask who I used to be. We just existed in the present moment, quiet mornings, coffee refills, soft glances that lingered just a little too long. Still, there were moments I caught him staring out at the ocean with an expression that made my chest tighten, like he was remembering something painful or preparing for it to find him again. One evening in October, a massive storm rolled in from the Pacific. Thick gray clouds, sheets of rain hammering the coast. The diner closed early, and I walked home with my rain jacket pulled tight against the wind. When I reached Aunt Rosemary's front porch, I found a figure sitting on the wooden steps, completely drenched. It was Cole. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, his hands buried deep in his jacket pockets. When he looked up at me, I saw something raw and vulnerable in his green eyes. "I didn't know where else to go," he said quietly. I nodded and opened the front door. Aunt Rosemary had driven to her book club in town, wouldn't be back until morning. "Come inside," I said. He hesitated for just a moment, then followed me into the warm cottage. I gave him a thick towel and made us both hot tea. We sat at the kitchen table while the storm rattled the windows and the lights flickered. For a long while, we just listened to the rain and wind. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I used to be a detective. Portland Police Bureau, Narcotics Division. Got too close to something I wasn't supposed to see. My partner was dirty, taking money from dealers, feeding them information about raids. When I figured it out and tried to report him, he set me up. Got me shot during what looked like a drug deal gone wrong." I stared at him, not sure what to say. My tea grew cold in my hands. "They covered it up," he continued, staring down at the table. "Said I was the dirty cop, that I'd been skimming money and got caught by angry dealers. I survived the shooting, but I lost everything, my badge, my reputation, my entire life. Everyone I trusted turned their backs on me." He looked up at me then, as if waiting to see if I'd run away too. I didn't move. "Sounds like you needed to disappear," I said softly. He nodded. "I just wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere no one would think to look for me. Somewhere I could figure out how to start over." We didn't talk after that. We just sat there drinking tea while the storm raged outside, two broken people who'd found unexpected shelter in each other. It had been nearly 5 years since I'd heard Blake's voice. But the moment I opened Aunt Rosemary's front door and saw him standing there on that foggy March morning, it was like time folded in on itself. My hands went completely numb. My breath caught in my throat. He looked older, leaner. His brown hair was longer and unkempt. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he held his hands up slowly like he was approaching a spooked animal. "Aurora," he said softly. "Please, can we just talk?" I didn't answer. I couldn't move. How had he found me? My mind raced frantically, trying to piece it together. I hadn't used my real name anywhere. I didn't have social media. I had been so careful to stay invisible. Then I heard familiar footsteps behind me. Cole appeared at my side and stepped protectively between Blake and me in one smooth, quiet motion. "Who are you?" Cole asked, his voice firm but controlled. Blake blinked at him, clearly caught off guard by this unexpected development. "I'm her husband." Those 3 words hit me like a physical blow. Husband. As if that title still meant something after 5 years of silence. As if he hadn't abandoned me in the Arizona desert for entertainment. I stepped out from behind Cole, finding my voice at last. "I'm not your wife anymore, Blake." Blake's eyes darted between us nervously. "Aurora, please. Just give me 5 minutes to explain." I looked at Cole. He didn't say anything, just gave me the slightest nod of support. I stepped outside onto the porch and closed the door behind me, leaving Cole inside but knowing he was right there if I needed him. We stood facing each other in the salty morning air. The wind carried the sounds of crashing waves and crying seagulls. Blake shoved his hands in his jacket pockets and stared at the weathered deck boards for a long time before speaking. "I've been looking for you," he said finally. "Ever since the video went viral." "What video?" I asked, my voice flat as stone. He glanced up, looking almost embarrassed. "Connor and Jackson started a YouTube channel last year, just messing around, telling stories about their crazy pranks. One day they decided to share what they did to you at that gas station. They thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever done." I stared at him without expression, waiting. "It went viral," he continued miserably. "Millions of views. But people weren't laughing, they were outraged. The comments were brutal. Everyone was calling us monsters, saying we were abusive. I didn't even know they were going to post that story. When I saw that video, something inside me just snapped." "Did it?" I asked quietly. He looked down at his feet. "I cut ties with them. Left the construction business we ran together. I've been trying to fix my life, trying to find you for over a year now." "Why now, Blake? Why after all this time?" He took a shaky breath. "Because I couldn't carry the guilt anymore. What I did to you, what we all did, it haunts me every single day. I wanted to find you and apologize properly. I wanted you to know how sorry I am. I wanted to believe he meant it. Part of me really did. But his regret had come 5 years too late." "You thought it was hilarious," I said simply. "You all laughed while I stood there terrified and abandoned." "I know," he whispered. "I was an idiot. I didn't understand what I was doing to you until it was too late. When you didn't come home, I thought you were just being dramatic. I thought you'd cool off and come back eventually." "I was never being dramatic," I replied firmly. "I was surviving. I left because none of you were ever going to save me. So I saved myself." He wiped his face with the back of his hand, and I could see he was trying not to cry. "I just needed you to hear me out, to know that I understand now how badly I messed up." I heard the front door open behind us. Cole stepped out onto the porch and came to stand beside me, calm, steady, protective without being possessive. Blake looked at him with confusion and growing realization. "Who is he to you?" I didn't hesitate for even a second. "My fiancé." Blake's jaw clenched visibly. Cole didn't say a word, but his quiet presence said everything that needed saying. I turned back to Blake, my voice gentle but final. "You didn't just lose me because of one cruel prank. You lost me because you never really saw me, Blake. Not as a person who deserved respect and kindness. I was just there for your convenience." Blake opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. His shoulders sagged as the full weight of his actions finally seemed to sink in. He nodded slowly. "I guess I deserved that," he said quietly. "You did," I said softly but without malice. He turned to leave, walking slowly down the garden path toward his rental car. Halfway there, he stopped without looking back. "For what it's worth, Aurora," he called out, "I'm glad you're okay. I'm glad you found someone who treats you the way you should have been treated all along." Then he got in his car and drove away into the coastal fog, disappearing from my life as suddenly as he'd reappeared. I stood there in the morning mist, Cole's gentle hand on my back. "You all right?" he asked softly. I nodded, surprised to find it was completely true. I didn't feel broken or shaken or sad. I just felt free, finally, completely free. The day after Blake showed up, I sat on the back deck with my morning coffee, watching the waves and processing everything that had happened. He'd really found me after 5 years. He'd tracked me down to this quiet corner of Oregon where I'd rebuilt my entire life. And now I had to face the truth I'd been avoiding. I had never gotten the closure I needed. But looking out at that endless Pacific Ocean, with Cole inside making us breakfast and Aunt Rosemary's wind chimes singing in the breeze, I realized something profound. I didn't need Blake's apology to heal. I didn't need his permission to move forward. I had already done the hardest work of rebuilding myself, and no one could take that away from me. That afternoon, Cole found me reading on the deck and sat down beside me. Without saying anything, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I was going to wait for a more romantic moment," he said with a shy smile, "but after yesterday, I realized life doesn't always give us perfect timing. Sometimes you just have to be brave and ask for what you want." He opened the box to reveal a simple, beautiful ring with a small diamond surrounded by tiny sapphires the color of the ocean. "Aurora Sterling," he said, taking my hand, "will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that love doesn't have to hurt?" Through happy tears, I said yes. 6 months later, we were married on the beach behind Aunt Rosemary's cottage, with the Pacific waves as our soundtrack and the sunset painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. It was small and perfect, just us, Aunt Rosemary, Mrs. Thompson from the diner, and a handful of friends from town. As Cole and I exchanged vows, I thought about that terrified woman who'd been abandoned at a gas station 5 years ago. She never could have imagined this moment, standing on a cliff overlooking the ocean, promising forever to a man who saw her worth from the very beginning. Blake had tracked me down hoping to find the broken woman he'd left behind. Instead, he found someone who had learned to save herself. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is leave. It forces you to discover just how strong you really are, and just how much better your life can be when you stop accepting less than you deserve. I never looked back again. There was no reason to. My future was standing right beside me, and it was more beautiful than anything I'd left behind.